The sun hung low over the dusty horizon of Castle Dome, Arizona Territory, in the year 1878. As Tabitha Foster stumbled through the doorway of Wilkins' General Store, her face streaked with tears, and her normally neat brown hair falling loose from its pins. Her trembling hands clutched a piece of paper that had traveled all the way from a doctor in Yuma, bearing news that could save her father's life if only she had the means to pay for it. Lucas Lawson was counting the coins in his leather pouch when he heard the commotion. For 6 long years, he'd worked the cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, saved every penny that didn't go to necessities, and built himself a modest stake. Just yesterday, he'd sold his best steers at a handsome price, finally accumulating enough to purchase that small ranch outside of town. He'd had his eye on a place to call his own after years of sleeping under the stars and weathering the elements. $250. Tabitha's voice cracked as she spoke to Mr. Wilkins, the storekeeper who also handled medicine orders for the remote mining town. "But sir, that's more than we make in half a year." Mr. Wilkins, a portly man with spectacles perched on his ruddy nose, shook his head sympathetically. "I'm sorry, Miss Foster. That's what the specialty medicine from San Francisco costs, plus shipping. Your father's condition requires the best treatment available." "I can't pay for the medicine," she cried, her voice breaking as the last vestiges of hope drained from her face. "My father will die without it." Lucas hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but in the small confines of the general store, private conversations rarely remained that way. He'd seen Tabitha around town since arriving in Castle Dome 3 months ago. She taught at the one-room schoolhouse and cared for her father, a former mine foreman who'd been struck down by a mysterious wasting illness that had progressively robbed him of his strength. Without thinking, Lucas stepped forward, the leather pouch heavy in his calloused hands. He'd never spoken more than a few words to Tabitha before, just polite greetings when their paths crossed. But something in her desperate plea moved him in a way he couldn't explain. "Mr. Wilkins," Lucas said, his deep voice drawing the attention of both the shopkeeper and the distraught woman. "Please order the medicine." Tabitha turned, her tear-filled green eyes meeting his. "Mr. Lawson, I appreciate your kindness, but I cannot accept charity. I'll find another way." Lucas didn't flinch. He stepped forward and placed the leather pouch on the counter. "It's not charity, madam. It's what neighbors do for each other out here." He pushed the pouch toward Mr. Wilkins. "There's $263 there. Should cover it, with something extra for fast delivery." Mr. Wilkins' eyebrows shot up at the substantial sum. "Mr. Lawson, are you certain?" "I know what you've been saving for. I'm certain," Lucas replied, his voice firm and unwavering. He turned to Tabitha, whose expression had transformed from despair to disbelief. "Your father needs that medicine. The ranch will still be there when I save up again." Tabitha stared at him, her mouth slightly open, unable to form words as tears welled anew in her eyes. "Mr. Lawson, that's your life savings. I can't possibly—" "You can and you will," he said gently. "Send the order today, Mr. Wilkins." With a tip of his hat, Lucas turned to leave, suddenly uncomfortable with the attention. "Wait," Tabitha called, hurrying after him as he reached the door. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the wooden porch of the general store. "Why would you do this for us? You barely know me or my father." Lucas paused, his hand on the door frame. He was a man of few words, and explaining the sudden impulse that had led him to hand over years of savings wasn't easy. "My ma died when I was 14 because we couldn't afford the doctor," he said finally, his voice low. "No one should have to lose someone that way. Not when something can be done about it." Before she could respond, he stepped outside into the fading light, leaving Tabitha standing in the doorway, watching his tall figure move down the street toward the modest boarding house where he rented a room. That night, as Lucas lay on his narrow bed staring at the ceiling, he questioned his impulsive decision. The small ranch with the creek running through it had been his dream for years. Now that dream would have to wait possibly for a long time. Yet when he remembered the look of desperation on Tabitha's face, he couldn't bring himself to regret what he'd done. 3 days later, Lucas was mending a fence on the Hamilton ranch, where he'd found temporary work, when he heard the sound of an approaching horse. Shading his eyes against the midday sun, he saw Tabitha Foster riding toward him, her blue calico dress bright against the dusty landscape. "Miss Foster," he said with surprise, removing his hat as she reined her horse to a stop. "Is everything all right?" She dismounted with practiced ease, revealing that beneath her proper schoolteacher exterior lay a woman accustomed to the practical demands of frontier life. "Mr. Lawson, I've come to make a proposition." Lucas raised an eyebrow but remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I've spoken with my father about what you did," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion that flickered across her face. "The medicine has been ordered and should arrive within the week. We can never repay such generosity in kind, but we would like to offer something in return." "That's not necessary, Miss Foster. Please hear me out," she insisted. "Our home has a small guest room that sits empty. My father and I would like to offer you board free of charge for as long as you need it. It would reduce your expenses and help you rebuild your savings." Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "I appreciate the offer, but I wouldn't want to impose on your family." "It's not an imposition if it's freely offered," she countered. "And there's more. I know you've been working odd jobs since you arrived in Castle Dome, but my father was well respected at the Silver King mine before his illness. He still has connections. He believes he could help secure you steady employment with better pay than ranch handwork." Lucas considered her offer. The boarding house took a significant portion of his monthly earnings, and steady work would indeed help him rebuild his savings faster. Still, he hesitated. "Your father is ill. Having a stranger in your home would give me another strong pair of hands around the place," she interrupted. "The house needs repairs I cannot manage alone, and caring for father while teaching has been challenging." For the first time, vulnerability showed through her composed demeanor. "Please consider it, Mr. Lawson, not as charity but as a fair exchange." The sincerity in her green eyes made it difficult to refuse. "I'll consider it," he said finally. "And thank you." Tabitha smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face and made Lucas suddenly aware of how pretty she was when not consumed by worry. "We're having supper at 6 tonight. Perhaps you could come by, see the room, and discuss it further with my father." "I'd be honored," he replied, surprising himself with how quickly he accepted. That evening, Lucas found himself sitting at the modest but well-kept Foster home on the outskirts of Castle Dome. The small wooden structure had been built with care, though Lucas's experienced eye noted several places where repairs were indeed needed: a sagging porch step, shingles missing from one corner of the roof, a window frame that had begun to rot. Thomas Foster, despite his illness, possessed a dignity and intelligence that immediately commanded respect. His handshake was weaker than it once must have been, but his eyes were sharp and assessing as he welcomed Lucas into their home. "So you're the man who handed over his life savings to help a stranger," Thomas said without preamble as they sat down to a simple meal of beef stew and cornbread. "Father," Tabitha admonished gently, a blush rising to her cheeks. "It's all right," Lucas said. "Yes, sir." "Though I don't see it that way. Just seemed like the right thing to do." Thomas studied him for a moment. Not many men would define right that way, especially out here where survival often depends on looking after yourself first. My pa taught me differently, Lucas replied. Said a man's character is measured by what he does when no one's watching and what he gives when he has little to spare. Thomas nodded approvingly. Your father sounds like a wise man. Is he still living? No, sir. Lost him in the war, Confederate side. I'm sorry to hear that. I served Union myself, but that's all past now. After what you've done for my Tabitha and me, I'd have been proud to shake your father's hand, regardless of which side he fought on. The conversation flowed more easily after that, and by the time Tabitha brought out apple pie for dessert, Lucas found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. There was something about the Foster home, despite the shadow of illness that hung over it, that felt welcoming and right. The guest room, when Tabitha showed it to him, was small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It's not much, she said, suddenly seeming nervous about his reaction. It's more than I've had in a long time, Lucas assured her. Most cowboys make do with a bedroll under the stars or a crowded bunkhouse. After examining the room and discussing the repairs the house needed, Lucas agreed to move in the following day. Thomas had already sent word to his former colleague at the Silver King mine about potential work for Lucas, and things seemed to be falling into place with a speed that left Lucas slightly bewildered. As he prepared to leave, Tabitha walked him to the door. Thank you for considering our offer, she said softly. It means a lot to both of us. I should be thanking you, Lucas replied. This arrangement benefits me as much as it does you. Tabitha shook her head slightly. You still don't understand what you've done, do you? That medicine, it's my father's only chance, the doctor in Yuma said without it. She paused, composing herself. You've given us hope, Mr. Lawson. There's no greater gift. Under the soft glow of the porch lantern, with her eyes shining with unshed tears, Tabitha Foster looked almost ethereal. Lucas felt a strange tightening in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation that both alarmed and intrigued him. Good night, Miss Foster, he said, placing his hat back on his head and stepping into the darkness. Good night, Mr. Lawson, she replied, and please call me Tabitha. Then I'm Lucas, he offered with a small smile before heading back toward town, his mind full of unexpected possibilities. The following week brought significant changes to Lucas's life. He moved into the Foster home, secured a position as a foreman's assistant at the Silver King mine thanks to Thomas's recommendation, and began working on the repairs the house desperately needed. The medicine arrived from San Francisco, an expensive concoction that the doctor in Yuma believed would help slow Thomas's deterioration and ease his symptoms. Lucas quickly established a routine. He rose before dawn, helped Tabitha with the heavier morning chores, worked his shift at the mine, and spent his evenings making repairs to the Foster home. Sundays were devoted to more extensive work on the house, from replacing damaged roof shingles to rebuilding the sagging porch steps. Tabitha, he discovered, was far more than the proper schoolteacher she appeared to be at first glance. She was fiercely intelligent, with a love of books and learning that had led her to fight for the teaching position in a town that had initially been reluctant to fund a school. She was also remarkably capable, managing the household, caring for her father, and teaching the town's children with a quiet determination that earned Lucas's growing admiration. One evening in late October, as Lucas worked on reinforcing the kitchen shelves, Tabitha approached him with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. You've done more work on this house in 3 weeks than I could have accomplished in a year, she said, handing him one of the mugs. Lucas accepted it gratefully, the autumn evenings having grown chilly. Just returning the favor, This arrangement is helping me save faster than I could have hoped." "Is that why you stay so busy?" Tabitha asked, leaning against the doorframe. "To rebuild your savings as quickly as possible?" Lucas paused, considering her question. "Partly," he admitted. "I've never been one for sitting idle, and I suppose I'm used to working from sunup to sundown." "You should rest sometimes," she suggested. "You're not just a pair of hands, Lucas. Father and I enjoy your company." The simple statement touched him more than he expected. "I enjoy yours as well," he said quietly, surprising himself with the admission. Tabitha smiled, a hint of color rising to her cheeks. "Then perhaps tomorrow evening you might join us after supper. Father has been teaching me chess, and he says he misses having a worthy opponent." "I haven't played in years," Lucas warned her. "All the better for me to finally win a match," Thomas called from the sitting room, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. The medicine, while not a cure, had indeed improved his condition remarkably. Lucas laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even himself. "In that case, how could I refuse?" Chess in the evening soon became part of their routine, as did reading aloud. Tabitha had a collection of books she treasured, and on nights when Thomas was too tired for chess, she would read to them both. Lucas, who had received only a basic education before life had forced him to work, found himself drawn into the world she revealed through literature. As autumn deepened toward winter, Lucas realized with a start that he had begun to think of the Foster home as his own. The transformation troubled him. He had always been a drifter, moving from job to job, place to place, never putting down roots. His dream of a small ranch had been about independence, not connection. Yet here, in this modest house with its crooked floorboards and patched roof, he had found something he hadn't known he was searching for. One Sunday in early December, as Lucas split firewood behind the house in preparation for the coming winter, Tabitha approached him with a woolen scarf in her hands. "I noticed you don't have proper winter gear," she said, holding out the dark blue scarf. "I made this for you." Lucas set down the axe and took the scarf, running his calloused fingers over the soft wool. No one had made him anything since his mother died. "This is too fine a gift," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Nonsense," Tabitha replied. "It's a practical necessity. Arizona winters may not be as harsh as some places, but the nights get cold enough." Lucas wrapped the scarf around his neck, the wool warm against his skin. "Thank you," he said simply, words inadequate to express what the gesture meant to him. Tabitha studied him for a moment, her head tilted slightly. "You've changed since you came here, Lucas." "Have I?" he asked, genuinely curious about how she perceived him. "You smile more," she said. "And you talk more too. Not that you were ever truly taciturn, just careful with your words." "My pa used to say a man should never speak unless he has something worth saying," Lucas explained. "And I suppose I've had more to say lately." "I'm glad," Tabitha replied. Then, with a hint of mischief in her eyes, she added, "Though I must admit, I was beginning to think the mysterious silent cowboy routine was intentional." Lucas laughed. "Nothing mysterious about me, I'm afraid. Just a man trying to make his way." Tabitha's expression turned more serious. "You're more than that, Lucas. What you did that day in the store, most men would have walked past and never thought twice about it." Uncomfortable with her praise, Lucas reached for the axe again. "I just did what seemed right. And that's what makes you different," she insisted. "You don't see it, but I do. So does Father." Before Lucas could respond, Thomas called from inside the house, needing Tabitha's assistance. She gave Lucas one last meaningful look before hurrying inside, leaving him with an inexplicable warmth that had nothing to do with physical exertion. As Christmas approached, Castle Dome prepared for its annual holiday gathering. The small town made the most of the occasion, with the women organizing a community dinner in the town hall and the men arranging for music and decorations. It was the one time of year when the hard-working miners and ranchers, along with their families, came together to celebrate surviving another year on the frontier. Tabitha, as the town's teacher, was heavily involved in preparing the children for a short Christmas performance. Lucas found himself volunteered to help build the simple stage and backdrops, a task he took to with surprising enthusiasm. "You're quite the craftsman," Tabitha observed one afternoon as Lucas finished constructing a stable for the nativity scene. "These are beautifully made." "My pa was a carpenter before he took up farming," Lucas explained, running a hand over the smooth wood. "He taught me the basics. Never thought I'd have much use for it as a cowboy." "Perhaps you were meant for more than just being a cowboy," Tabitha suggested, her words carrying more meaning than the simple observation might suggest. Lucas glanced up at her, struck once again by how beautiful she looked when animated by a project she cared about. Her brown hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, but tendrils had escaped to frame her face. Her green eyes sparkled with excitement about the coming festivities, and a smudge of paint adorned one cheek where she'd absent-mindedly touched her face while working on the backdrop. Without thinking, Lucas reached out and gently wiped the paint from her cheek with his thumb. "You had paint," he explained, his voice suddenly hoarse. Tabitha froze at his touch, her eyes widening slightly. For a moment they stood there, Lucas's hand still near her face, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Tabitha, there you are." The moment was broken by Mrs. Patterson, the blacksmith's wife, bustling into the town hall. "We need your opinion on the music selection for the children's performance." The spell shattered, Tabitha stepped back, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "Of course, Mrs. Patterson, I'll be right there." She glanced at Lucas once more, something unreadable in her expression, before hurrying away. Lucas remained where he was, his hand still tingling from the brief contact with her skin. He had never been one to develop attachments easily, yet in the months since moving into the Foster home, Tabitha had somehow slipped past the carefully constructed barriers he'd maintained for years. The realization both exhilarated and terrified him. The night of the Christmas gathering arrived with a rare dusting of snow that transformed Castle Dome into something almost magical. The town hall was decorated with pine boughs, red ribbons, and as many candles as could be safely arranged. A large tree stood in one corner, adorned with handmade ornaments and strings of popcorn and cranberries. Thomas Foster, having a good day in his ongoing battle with illness, insisted on attending. Lucas helped him dress in his best suit, noting with concern how the garment hung loosely on his diminished frame despite the improvements from the medicine. "You're looking at me like I might break, son," Thomas said with a wry smile as Lucas assisted him with his tie. "Just making sure you're presentable, sir," Lucas replied. "Can't have you embarrassing Miss Tabitha in front of the whole town," Thomas chuckled. "Speaking of my daughter, I've seen how you look at her when you think no one's watching." Lucas's hand stilled. "Sir, I no need to explain," Thomas interrupted gently. "I may be ill, but I'm not blind, and I want you to know that if your intentions are honorable, you have my blessing." Lucas swallowed hard, unprepared for this conversation. "Mr. Foster, we haven't, I know," Thomas said. "You're both too proper and too cautious. But life out here is uncertain, Lucas. If there's one thing my illness has taught me, it's not to waste time when something important is at stake." Before Lucas could respond, Tabitha called from downstairs that the wagon was ready. The conversation was set aside, but Thomas's words echoed in Lucas's mind as they made their way to town. The Christmas gathering was everything a frontier celebration should be: boisterous, heartfelt, and filled with the kind of joy that comes from people who understand the value of community in a harsh land. The children's performance went off with only minor mishaps, earning proud applause from parents and neighbors alike. Tabitha, released from her teaching duties for the evening, approached Lucas as he stood watching the dancing that had commenced after dinner. She wore a dress of deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was arranged more elaborately than usual, with a few curls framing her face. "You're not dancing," she observed, coming to stand beside him. "I don't know how," Lucas admitted. "Never had much occasion to learn." "It's not difficult," she assured him. "Especially not the way they dance here in Castle Dome, which is more enthusiasm than technique." Lucas smiled at her gentle teasing. "Are you offering to teach me, Miss Foster?" "I might be," she replied, a hint of challenge in her voice. Before Lucas could respond, Sheriff Davis approached them, tipping his hat politely to Tabitha. "Miss Foster, might I have the next dance?" Tabitha hesitated, glancing at Lucas, who nodded slightly. "Of course, Sheriff," she said, allowing the lawman to lead her onto the dance floor. Lucas watched as Tabitha moved gracefully through the steps of the dance, her green dress swirling around her ankles. The sight stirred emotions he had long kept dormant, and Thomas's words from earlier returned to him with new significance. Later, as the evening wound down and many of the older residents and families with young children had departed, the remaining revelers called for Tabitha to sing. Apparently, this was something of a tradition, though Lucas had never heard her sing before. With gentle encouragement from the crowd, Tabitha stood before them, a slight nervousness visible only to those who knew her well. And then she began to sing "Silent Night," her clear soprano voice filling the town hall with a purity that brought unexpected tears to Lucas's eyes. As her voice soared through the final verses, Lucas found himself unable to look away from her. In that moment, he acknowledged what he had been trying to deny for weeks: he had fallen in love with Tabitha Foster. The realization should have frightened him. Instead, it settled into his heart with a rightness that felt like coming home after a long journey. When the gathering finally ended and they returned to the Foster home, Thomas retired immediately, exhausted but pleased with the evening. Lucas built up the fire in the sitting room while Tabitha prepared hot chocolate, a rare treat she had been saving for the holiday. They sat together before the fire, the house quiet around them, both content with the comfortable silence that had become characteristic of their relationship. "Did you enjoy the gathering?" Tabitha asked finally, cradling her mug between her hands. "More than I expected to," Lucas admitted. "Your singing was beautiful. I had no idea you had such a voice." Tabitha ducked her head, embarrassed by the praise. "Mother insisted on music lessons when I was young, before we moved west. She believed a proper education included appreciation of the arts." "She was right," Lucas said, "though I reckon she didn't imagine you'd be using that training to brighten Christmas in a mining town." Tabitha smiled, a touch of sadness in her expression. "No, I don't imagine she did. She had grand plans for me finishing school back east, perhaps marriage to a lawyer or doctor." "Do you regret not having that life?" Lucas asked, genuinely curious about her answer. Tabitha considered the question seriously. "There are moments when I wonder what might have been," she admitted. "But no, I don't regret the path my life has taken. Teaching here, caring for Father, it has meaning, and meaning is worth more than comfort or status." "You're remarkable, Tabitha Foster," Lucas said softly, the words escaping before he could consider them. Tabitha looked up, surprise and something warmer filling her expression. "That's high praise from a man who handed over his life savings to help strangers." Not strangers anymore, Lucas pointed out. No, she agreed, her voice equally soft. Not strangers at all. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Finally, Lucas set down his empty mug and stood. It's late. We should both get some rest. Tabitha nodded, though he thought he detected a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Of course. Good night, Lucas. Good night, Tabitha, he replied, hesitating only briefly before heading upstairs, aware that he had just let a moment pass that might not come again soon. January brought unusually harsh weather to Castle Dome, with bitter cold and occasional snow flurries that hampered work at the mine and made travel difficult. Thomas's condition worsened despite the medicine, the cold weather exacerbating his symptoms. Lucas and Tabitha took turns sitting with him through several frightening nights, when his breathing became labored and fever set in. During one such night, as a winter storm howled around the house, Lucas relieved Tabitha at Thomas's bedside, insisting she get some rest after teaching all day and tending her father through the early evening. Go sleep, he told her gently. I'll wake you if there's any change. Reluctantly, Tabitha agreed, squeezing her father's hand before leaving the room. Lucas settled into the chair beside the bed, prepared for a long night of vigilance. To his surprise, Thomas opened his eyes shortly after Tabitha left. She's gone, he asked, his voice weak but lucid. Yes, sir. I convinced her to get some sleep, Lucas replied, leaning forward. Can I get you anything? Water? Thomas shook his head slightly. No, son, I wanted to speak with you alone. He paused, gathering his strength. The medicine helps, but we both know I'm not getting better. Mr. Foster, let me finish, Thomas interrupted. I don't have many lucid moments like this anymore, and I need to say this while I can. He took a labored breath. I've watched you these past months. You're a good man, Lucas. The kind of man I would have chosen for Tabitha if I'd had the luxury of time. Lucas swallowed hard. Sir, she cares for you, Thomas continued. More than she might admit, even to herself. She's too loyal to think of her own happiness while I'm still here, but after I'm gone. Don't talk that way, Lucas said. You're going to recover. Thomas managed a weak smile. We both know that's not true, and when I'm gone, Tabitha will be alone in the world. No family, just this house and her teaching position. She won't be alone, Lucas promised. I'll make sure of it. Thomas studied him for a long moment. Do you love her, son? The directness of the question startled Lucas, but he answered without hesitation. Yes, sir, I do. Then don't waste time, Thomas advised. Life is shorter than we ever believe it to be. Tell her while I'm still here to see it. Give me that piece before I go. Lucas sat with Thomas's words long after the older man had drifted back to sleep, the storm outside matching the tumult of his thoughts. When Tabitha returned at dawn to check on her father, she found Lucas still awake, his expression troubled. Has he worsened? She asked anxiously, moving to check her father's forehead for fever. No, he's been resting comfortably the past few hours, Lucas assured her. I just had a lot on my mind. Tabitha gave him a searching look. You should get some rest yourself. You look exhausted. I will, he promised, standing to stretch his stiff muscles. At the doorway, he paused. Tabitha. Yes, when you're done here, would you join me for breakfast? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Her eyebrows rose slightly at his formal tone. Of course, I'll be down shortly. In the kitchen, Lucas busied himself preparing a simple breakfast, his heart pounding as he rehearsed what he wanted to say. When Tabitha finally appeared, looking tired but composed, he had coffee and biscuits ready. Father is sleeping peacefully now, she reported, accepting the cup he offered. Thank you for sitting with him. Lucas nodded, gathering his courage. Tabitha, there's something I need to tell you. She looked up, her green eyes meeting his with a hint of concern. What is it? These past months living here, working at the mine, being part of your lives, it's changed me." He paused, searching for the right words. "I came to Castle Dome with one dream, saving enough to buy that small ranch outside of town. But now, she prompted when he faltered. "Now I have a different dream," he admitted. "One that includes you if you'll have me." Tabitha's cup clattered against the saucer as her hands trembled. "Lucas, are you saying—" "I'm saying I love you, Tabitha Foster," he said, the words finally free. "I think I started falling in love with you that day in the store, though I was too stubborn to recognize it. And I'm saying that when you're ready, I'd like to court you properly, with your father's blessing, which he's already given, by the way." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes. "He spoke to you about this last night," Lucas confirmed. "He seems to have noticed something between us before we did." A tear spilled down Tabitha's cheek. "He's always been perceptive," she said with a watery smile. "Even before his illness." Lucas reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I know this isn't the time for grand plans, not with your father so ill. But I wanted you to know my feelings and to know that whatever happens, you won't face it alone." Tabitha turned her hand in his, intertwining their fingers. "I've been fighting my feelings for you for months," she confessed. "It seemed wrong to think of happiness when father was suffering. And I was afraid you would eventually leave, return to your wandering life." "I'm done wandering," Lucas assured her. "My place is here now with you." Tabitha's eyes shone with a mixture of tears and joy. "I love you too, Lucas. I think I have almost from the beginning." The simple declaration filled Lucas with a warmth that drove away the winter chill. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then we'll face whatever comes together." Their courtship began quietly, respectful of Thomas's condition, but with his enthusiastic blessing. On good days, Thomas would sit in the parlor and watch with undisguised pleasure as Lucas and Tabitha played chess or read to each other. On bad days, they took turns sitting with him, sometimes holding hands by his bedside as he drifted in and out of consciousness. February brought a brief respite in Thomas's decline. For nearly 2 weeks, he rallied enough to sit up for longer periods, eat properly, and even venture onto the porch on milder days. During this time, Lucas proposed formally, offering Tabitha a simple silver ring he had purchased with his first extra savings from the mine. "It's not fancy," he apologized as he slipped it onto her finger. "But once we're married, I'll replace it with something worthy of you." "Don't you dare," Tabitha replied, admiring the band on her finger. "This is perfect because it comes from you." They were married on the last Sunday in February in a simple ceremony in the Foster home. Thomas, dressed in his best suit and propped up in an armchair, beamed with pride as the town's minister pronounced them husband and wife. Only a handful of close friends attended, including Mr. Wilkins and Sheriff Davis, but the small gathering was filled with genuine warmth and celebration. Thomas Foster passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later, his hand held by Tabitha, with Lucas standing steady beside her. His final days had been eased not only by the medicine that Lucas's sacrifice had provided, but by the knowledge that his beloved daughter would not face the future alone. The town of Castle Dome turned out in force for Thomas Foster's funeral, a testament to the respect the former mine foreman had earned during his years in the community. Tabitha, supported by Lucas's quiet strength, received the condolences with grace, though her grief was evident in the shadows beneath her eyes and the paleness of her face. In the days following the funeral, as Tabitha navigated her grief while continuing her teaching duties, Lucas made a decision. Without telling his wife, he rode out to the small ranch he had once dreamed of purchasing and spoke with the owner, a widower named Jenkins, who had been trying to sell the property for over a year. "Mr. Jenkins," Lucas said, after examining the modest cabin and surveying the property, "I'd like to make you an offer." Jenkins, a grizzled man in his 60s with arthritis that made ranching increasingly difficult, raised an eyebrow. "Thought you'd given up on this place, Lawson." "Heard you got married and settled in at the Foster place." "I did," Lucas confirmed. "But my wife grew up in that house with memories of her parents. Now that her father's gone, I'm thinking she might benefit from a fresh start, something that's ours together, not just hers that I moved into." Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense. What are you offering?" Lucas named a sum that was less than his original savings but reflected what he had managed to accumulate again in the month since paying for Thomas's medicine. "I know it's less than you were asking, but it's all I have in cash. I could work out payments for the remainder." Jenkins studied him for a long moment. "You know, when you first came looking at this place last year, I had my doubts. Young cowboy with big dreams but maybe not enough experience. Now, though." He glanced around at the property. "This place needs someone who'll care for it proper, and from what I hear about how you fixed up the Foster place, you're that kind of man." He extended his hand. "Deal. Cash offer accepted, no payments needed." "It's worth less than I was asking anyway, and I'm tired of waiting for a buyer who might never come." Lucas was stunned by the easy acceptance. "Are you certain?" Jenkins chuckled. "Son, at my age, certainty is one of the few luxuries I have left. You'll do right by this land, and that matters to me." They shook hands, and Lucas rode back to town with the weight of property ownership settling on his shoulders, a weight he found he welcomed. That evening, after supper, Lucas took Tabitha's hand. "I'd like to show you something if you're feeling up to a short ride." Tabitha, who had been subdued since her father's passing, looked up with mild curiosity. "Now, it's almost sunset. Best time to see it," Lucas insisted. "Trust me." A small smile touched her lips. "Always." They rode out as the sun began its descent, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and amber. As they crested a small rise, the cabin came into view, smoke rising from the chimney where Jenkins had lit a fire before departing for town earlier. Tabitha reined her horse to a stop. "Isn't this the Jenkins place, the ranch you were saving for?" "It was," Lucas confirmed. "Now it's ours." Tabitha turned to him, confusion written across her face. "What do you mean, ours?" "I bought it today," he explained. "I've been saving again since taking the mine job, and Jenkins accepted a lower offer than he was originally asking." "But why?" Tabitha asked, genuinely puzzled. "We have a perfectly good home in town." Lucas moved his horse closer to hers, reaching out to take her hand. "That's your childhood home, Tabitha, full of memories of your parents, both happy and sad. I thought perhaps we might want a place that's truly ours to build our own memories in." Tears filled Tabitha's eyes. "You did this for me, to help me move forward, for us," Lucas corrected gently. "And only if you want it. If you'd rather stay in town, we can sell this place. I won't make any decision that important without your agreement." Tabitha gazed at the small cabin nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains, the creek running nearby, the open land stretching around it. Then she looked back at Lucas, her heart in her eyes. "I think Father would approve," she said softly. "He always said you were a man with vision." "Is that a yes?" Lucas asked, hope rising in his chest. Tabitha smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen since her father's death. "Yes, Lucas. Let's make this our home." The spring and summer of 1879 passed in a blur of activity as Lucas and Tabitha divided their time between her teaching duties, his work at the mine, and transforming the small ranch into a true home. Lucas acquired a small herd of cattle to start, focusing on quality breeding stock rather than quantity. Tabitha planted a garden and gradually transformed the sparse interior of the cabin into a comfortable home. By late summer, the small ranch was beginning to flourish. Lucas had constructed additional fencing, repaired the barn, and expanded the cabin by adding a second bedroom. Tabitha had established a thriving vegetable garden and even planted flowers around the porch, bringing color and softness to the frontier homestead. On a warm evening in August, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Tabitha took Lucas's hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. "There's going to be 3 of us by spring," she said softly, her eyes searching his face for his reaction. Lucas stared at her, momentarily speechless before a smile of pure joy spread across his face. "A baby, you're certain?" Tabitha nodded, her own smile radiant. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I went into town. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Lucas pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by emotion. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed against her hair. "A home, a wife I adore, and now a child on the way. It's more than I ever dreamed possible." "And to think," Tabitha said, leaning back to look into his eyes, "it all began because you couldn't walk past a woman in distress." "Best decision I ever made," Lucas replied, his voice husky with emotion. "Giving up that money brought me the richest life a man could ask for." As winter settled over Castle Dome, Tabitha's pregnancy progressed smoothly. She continued teaching through December, with Lucas insisting on accompanying her to and from town once the weather turned colder. The small community, having embraced them as a couple, now celebrated the coming addition to their family with handmade gifts and practical assistance. On Christmas Eve, almost exactly a year after Lucas had acknowledged his feelings for Tabitha, they sat before the fire in their cabin, reminiscing about the previous year's holiday gathering. "So much has changed in a year," Tabitha mused, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Last Christmas, Father was still with us, and you and I were just beginning to recognize what was between us. And now look at us," Lucas said, his arm around her shoulders, "married with a ranch and a baby on the way. Do you ever regret it?" Tabitha asked suddenly. "Giving up your savings that day? You could have had this ranch months earlier if you hadn't." Lucas considered the question seriously. "Not for a single moment," he said finally. "If I had bought this place earlier, I would have had the land but not you. And what would be the point of having a home without you to share it with?" Tabitha leaned into him, content and secure in his love. "I think about that day sometimes, how close we came to never knowing each other this way. If Father's illness hadn't worsened when it did, if you hadn't been in the store at that exact moment." "I don't believe it was chance," Lucas said. "My ma used to say that God puts people in our path when we need them most, if only we have the wisdom to recognize the gift." "Then we were both wise enough to recognize it," Tabitha replied, lifting her face for his kiss. Their son, Thomas Lucas Lawson, was born on a clear spring morning in March 1880. With hair as dark as his father's and eyes that promised to be as green as his mother's, he was a perfect blend of his parents. Lucas, who had paced anxiously outside the bedroom during the birth attended by the town's midwife, broke down in tears when he first held his son. "He's perfect," he whispered to an exhausted but radiant Tabitha. "Absolutely perfect." Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby's arrival. Lucas hired help for the ranch so he could reduce his hours at the mine and be more available to Tabitha and young Thomas. Tabitha temporarily set aside her teaching position, though she continued to tutor several of the older students who rode out to the ranch once a week for additional instruction. As young Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Lucas's careful breeding program began to yield results, with his small herd becoming known for its quality. He expanded their operations, adding a few horses to the stock and increasing the cultivated land where they grew feed. In the fall of 1881, shortly after Thomas's first birthday, Tabitha and Lucas hosted a harvest gathering at the ranch, inviting friends from town to celebrate the successful year. As the guests enjoyed food and music in the yard, Tabitha found Lucas standing apart, watching the scene with a look of quiet satisfaction. "Happy?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. "More than I knew was possible," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was just thinking about how far we've come from that day in the general store. Mr. Wilkins was asking about you earlier," Tabitha said. "He still tells anyone who'll listen about how you handed over all your money without a second thought." Lucas shook his head, slightly embarrassed. "He makes it sound grander than it was." "It was grand to me," Tabitha insisted. "It saved my father's life, gave us those precious extra months with him, and it brought you into our lives." Lucas pulled her closer. "I've been thinking," he said, changing the subject. "The ranch is doing well enough now that we could add on to the cabin again. Perhaps a proper study for you where you could teach more students if you wanted." Tabitha's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "I'd like that. I've missed teaching more regularly." "I know," Lucas said. "I see how you come alive when you're working with the students who come here." "You notice everything, don't you?" Tabitha asked, affection warming her voice. "Only when it comes to you and Thomas," he replied. "You're my world, Tabitha. Everything else is just details." In the spring of 1882, they expanded the cabin as planned, adding not only a study for Tabitha, but also another bedroom. The expansion proved timely when, that summer, Tabitha discovered she was expecting their second child. "Thomas will have a brother or sister," she told Lucas as they sat on the porch swing he had built the previous year. "Are you pleased?" Overjoyed, he assured her, his hand covering hers. "Though I hope this pregnancy is easier on you than the last." Tabitha laughed. "I was perfectly fine. You were the one who worried enough for both of us." "Can you blame me?" Lucas asked. "You're precious to me, and so is our family." The second pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in February 1883 their daughter Elizabeth Grace Lawson was born, named after both of their mothers. With her mother's brown hair and her father's blue eyes, she was as beautiful as her brother was handsome. As their family grew, so did the ranch. By 1885, the Lawson Ranch had become one of the most successful smaller operations in the territory. Lucas's reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spread beyond Castle Dome, bringing buyers from as far away as Phoenix and Tucson. Tabitha had resumed teaching part-time in town, bringing young Thomas and Elizabeth with her on the days she taught. The children thrived in the schoolroom environment, with Thomas showing an early aptitude for reading that delighted his mother. One evening, as Lucas returned from town with supplies, he found Tabitha sitting on the porch, a letter in her hands and an expression of shocked disbelief on her face. "What is it?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Bad news." Tabitha looked up, her eyes wide. "It's from my father's doctor in Yuma, the one who prescribed the medicine." Lucas set down the packages he was carrying and sat beside her. "What does he say?" "He's retiring and clearing out his files," Tabitha explained. "He came across my father's case and thought I might want to know something." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "Lucas, the medicine we purchased, the one you gave your savings for, it wasn't just to ease symptoms. The doctor believes it actually extended Father's life significantly." "That's good news, isn't it?" Lucas asked, confused by her reaction. "You don't understand," Tabitha said, her eyes filling with tears. "Without that medicine, the doctor estimates Father would have died within weeks, not months. We wouldn't have had that Christmas together. He wouldn't have seen us married. He wouldn't have known about Thomas." The significance of what she was saying sank in. "So if I hadn't been in the store that day, or if you had walked past," Tabitha continued, "or if you had kept your money for your ranch, then Thomas would never have seen his daughter married," Lucas finished, "and he would have died believing you would be left alone." Tabitha nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Your sacrifice gave him peace in his final months, and it gave me you." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried not from sorrow this time, but from a complex mixture of gratitude and renewed grief at the realization of how precious those final months with her father had truly been. "I've never regretted giving that money," Lucas said softly. "Not once. But knowing what it really meant for your father, I'd give it 100 times over." In the years that followed, the Lawson family continued to grow and prosper. A third child, James, joined them in 1887, completing their family. The ranch expanded further, with Lucas eventually purchasing adjacent land from a neighbor who decided to move east. Tabitha's teaching evolved into the establishment of a proper school on their property, where she taught not only their own children but those from neighboring ranches and farms too distant from town for daily attendance at the Castle Dome School. In 1890, on the 12th anniversary of the day, Lucas had handed over his savings in Wilkins' General Store. The couple sat together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the mountains. 12 years, Tabitha mused, her head resting on Lucas's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you walked into our lives." "Best decision I ever made," Lucas replied, the words a familiar refrain between them. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been in the store that day?" Tabitha asked. Lucas considered the question. "I used to in the early days, but not anymore. I believe we were meant to find each other one way or another, if not that day, then another." "Such faith," Tabitha teased gently, though her eyes were serious. "Not faith," Lucas corrected. "Experience. Every important turn in my life has led me to where I'm supposed to be, even when it didn't make sense at the time. Losing my parents, becoming a cowboy, drifting to Arizona, all of it brought me to that store on that day." Tabitha looked out at their children: Thomas, now 10 and tall for his age; Elizabeth, 7 and already showing her mother's intelligence; and little James, 3 and full of mischief. Then she gazed beyond them to the ranch that had grown from a small homestead to a thriving enterprise, and finally back to the man beside her, whose impulsive generosity had changed the course of so many lives. "I'm glad you were there," she said simply. "And I'm grateful every day for the life we've built together." "As am I," Lucas replied, drawing her closer. "As am I." As twilight deepened into darkness and the first stars appeared overhead, Lucas reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From a wandering cowboy with nothing but a dream and a pouch of hard-earned savings, to a husband, father, and successful rancher, all because he couldn't walk past a woman in distress. "I can't pay for the medicine," she had cried that day, her voice breaking with despair. And he, without fully understanding why, had handed over his life savings without hesitation, a single act of kindness that had returned to him 1,000-fold in love, family, and purpose. In the quietness of the evening, with his wife beside him and their children's laughter filling the air, Lucas Lawson knew with absolute certainty that no amount of money could ever have purchased the true wealth he had found in Castle Dome, Arizona, the wealth of a life well lived and deeply loved.